Hello, welcome back. In the last session, we looked at the arrest of Jesus, and we'll pick up there in this session. So the people had Jesus arrested because Jesus was claiming to be Messiah. And the word Messiah literally means anointed one. And in context, Messiah or Christ, same word, it's just Greek or Hebrew. Messiah or Christ is the anointed king who the prophets said would come from David's line, a descendant of David, who would overthrow the enemies of God and reign in Jerusalem forever. This Messiah would establish peace on the earth, and all these great things would happen, particularly for the Jews, not so much for the enemies of God. But they're waiting for Messiah to come. Jesus was claiming to be Messiah, and he was doing things that the Jews didn't think Messiah would ever do. And in particular, he was breaking some of the oral traditions, the oral law, and he also committed blasphemy on several occasions, claiming to be God himself. And so these religious leaders are saying he's got so many followers, and he has more followers than we have. So we got to do something about this, because with all his followers, if he rises up against Rome, this will be seen as an act of war. And Rome will come in and go to war with us and will win because he's not Messiah. So we have to stop him before that happens. And when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, he was very publicly saying, "I'm the king, the kingdom of God has come, follow me." And everybody was waiting for him to pick up that sword and go. Rome is on edge. There are guards around watching, and things are getting really pretty heated right now. So they have Jesus arrested. They had Judas. They paid Judas to help them. Judas, by the way, when they saw Jesus being taken to be executed, right? He just, I don't think that's really what he wanted to happen. There's a lot of speculation about why Judas did what he did. We'll talk about that maybe some other time, but I don't think he quite wanted that to happen. And he took that money. It wasn't a whole lot of money when you're talking about handing somebody over to be killed. The 30 pieces of silver, he took that back to the Sanhedrin and said, "I don't want this." They said, "We can't take it back, it's yours." And he just threw it on the ground and left. And he went out and hung himself. He was just so filled with remorse and guilt for what he had done that he hung himself. Well, meanwhile, the people are trying to get Jesus charged with charges that'll stick before the Romans. Now, this is really an issue of Jewish interpretation of the Jewish scriptures. The Romans don't care about that. As far as the Romans go, you can worship any gods you want to worship, and we don't care how you do it, and if you do it right or not. It doesn't matter to us. So they need to find charges that Rome will care about, because they don't want Rome thinking that Jesus is rising up and it's an act of war coming down and killing them all. So they're trying to do this quietly so that there are no riots. They do it at night. Judas leads them to the place where they can arrest him quietly and not have a huge riot. They come up with all these fake charges against him. They keep contradicting themselves, and nothing that would hold up against Rome. And finally, the council, they assembled, and where am I here? Toward the end of Luke chapter 22, if you're trying to follow along, they said, "If you are the Christ," and remember that's just that's the Greek form of the word Messiah. "If you are the king in the line of David, tell us." Right? Not like he hasn't been saying that all along. Right? But Jesus said to them, "If I tell you, you won't believe. If I ask a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." Well, that's a reference to Daniel. And in Daniel had a vision where there's God himself on the throne in heaven, and this one like a son of man was led right up to him, and to him, this one like a son of man was given dominion and glory and power, and basically he sat on the throne, and that would be a picture of Messiah. So Jesus is saying this to say, yes, I am Messiah. Not only am I Messiah, but from now on, I am that fulfillment of Daniel, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. Right? I am next to God himself. And they said, are you the Son of God then? And he said to them, I am. And that was, John makes a big deal about this in particular, that he's kind of taking the holiest name of God when he says that. Well, then they said, what more do we need? We have heard it from ourselves from his own mouth. So they bring him to Pilate. He's the regional king of Rome, right? Not Caesar himself, but he's the local king. He'd be responsible for all this. Well, they can't execute Jesus. All they can do is get Rome to do it for them. They do it by bringing this testimony against Jesus that Jesus said, I am the king. I'm the king of the Jews. And they go to Pilate and say, this man Jesus, he's claiming to be king of the Jews. That's insurrection. You have to have him killed. And Pilate examines him, asks him questions. Jesus refuses to answer. And, Pilate basically says, look, don't you know that it's in my power to kill you or free you? And Jesus says, you have no power except the power my Father gives you. And during this conversation, he goes to see Pilate. He sees King Herod, right? Just two different regional kings, and they're kind of arguing about which one has to deal with it. This is your jurisdiction. No, it's you take them. And all this is going on. Pilate doesn't see any real reason to have Jesus executed, right? But he doesn't seem to be a threat, right? At one point, Jesus is even asked, are you a king? And Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. In other words, I'm a king, but I'm not a threat to you, right? I'm not here to overthrow Rome. I'm not, there's nothing you got to worry about. My kingdom is not of this world, it's elsewhere. And, Pilate, after talking with Jesus, hearing him, seeing him, he just says, this guy's not a threat. And he goes back to the Jews and basically says, I don't find anything worthy of the death sentence here, right? You all got to deal with this. And they insist, no, he must die. If you don't execute him for treason, we will go to Caesar and let Caesar know that you are letting this person live, even though he's claiming to be an insurrectionist, he's claiming to be a king, he's going to rise up against you. We don't want the wrath of Rome on us. We want to make sure that this threat is taken care of and dealt with completely. And they're threatening to go to Caesar over this and say, Caesar, we have this guy claiming to be a king and rise up in a war, and Pilate isn't doing anything about it, right? And it's just all this politics mixed in with it. So Pilate takes Jesus and has him scourged. And this is a brutal form of torture. And Mel Gibson had that movie a while back, The Passion of the Christ, I think it was called. And it's very, very shocking visuals there. And I've been told that the real thing would have even been more brutal than that. And they had to tone it down a little bit for the rated R audience that they had. So it's just absolutely horrifyingly brutal. And you'd have, without going into much detail, you have a whip, really sharp hook type thing at the end, and it goes into the skin in the back, and you yank it back out, and just over and over again until the person either confesses their crime, or you can do it once, you can do it up to 40 times, which is that's known as what would kill you, right? They did it to Jesus. It was just over and over and over, and the Bible tells us that he was his whole flesh was completely disfigured. They took a crown of thorns, and not from little prickle bush, but thorns, and made this fake crown out of it and said, oh, you're the king of the Jews, huh? Here's a crown for you. And they pounded that into his head, and just all sorts of brutal, torturous things, completely making fun of him. And Jesus would have been, he would have lost a whole lot of blood. His body would have been in shock. They bring him back to Pilate. Pilate brings him back to the people. And Pilate looks out at the people, and he points to Jesus and said, look at your king. Right? He's no threat. Let him go. Right? Now, Pilate had him scourged like this to try to save his life, really. Pilate he doesn't want to kill Jesus. And he's trying to get out of having this guy killed. And he says, look at this guy. He is absolutely no threat to Rome. Take him, right? I can't issue the death sentence on this guy. I'm not going to execute this guy. And the people just start shouting, crucify him. We want him dead. And Pilate then has another plan. So every year, right around the Passover, they take a Jewish prisoner, bring him out of prison, and the Jews get to pick a certain prisoner that would be set free. Well, Pilate brings out a zealot, a guy who was notorious for starting riots and starting little skirmishes and mini wars against Rome. He was a person who would do the exact thing they're accusing Jesus of doing, the thing they're afraid of Jesus was doing. So remember, Jesus says he's Messiah, and if he rises against Rome with all his followers, he has so many followers, it will be a small army going against Rome. It'll be an act of war, a declaration of war. That's what they think Jesus is going to do. That's why they want him dead. So Pilate brings out somebody who has already tried it. He didn't have as many followers yet at that point, and he was thrown in prison. But this guy, everybody knows if this guy gets out of prison, he's going to gather an army and try it again. So Pilate here it's a really brilliant strategy to free Jesus. He says to all the Jews, look, you're afraid of a king, supposedly, rising up against Rome and starting a war. I'll release somebody to you. It can either be this guy who will do that, and everybody here knows he will do that, or your supposed king who can barely stand up at this point. Who should I release to you? And the logical choice would be release Jesus, keep Barabbas in jail, because he's going to start trouble. But no, they just say, give us Barabbas, kill Jesus, crucify Jesus. And Pilate, now, he's got nothing left. And he tries just again and again to get them to change their minds, and they won't. And he finally ceremonially, symbolically takes some water, washes his hands, and he says, I wash my hands of this man's blood. In other words, the blood of Jesus is on you. And hands him over to be crucified. Jesus carried one of the main beams of the cross up to the site where they would crucify everybody. Crucifixion was brutal. People would live for days on the cross. They would nail the person into the wood by a little spot between bones in the wrist and by a spot in your ankles, the top of your feet. And that didn't kill you. Hanging from the cross didn't really kill you. But when you hang from the cross in that position, you can't breathe. And so you just instinctively, like the subconscious takes over and you need to breathe, and your body forces itself to push itself up to where you can breathe, and it's excruciatingly painful then because of the wrists and ankles. And you take a deep breath and let go, and then you exhale as slowly as you can and try to go as long as you can without breathing again, and then you have to breathe, and you can stay alive like that for days. Often animals would come in at night and start having a little snack on your toes and your legs, and it was brutal. Well, Jesus was so badly beaten already from the scourging. They put him up on the cross, they hung him there, and he lasted about 6 hours maybe. And during that time, there were 2 other people on the cross. Translations a lot of times say thieves. My understanding is that these were both people who were also zealots rising up against Rome. And Jesus was crucified right in the middle of them. They would do this publicly so that everybody walking on the main road in and out of the city would see them. And it's a way of publicly saying, this is what happens to you if you mess with Rome. Don't mess with Rome. And so everybody who's on this busy road, traveling on this busy road, would see them there. When you were crucified, you didn't have that nice fancy flowing robe that usually hangs over depictions of Jesus on the cross. They were nude. You would, bodily functions are still going, right? The people who were being crucified would, they'd have to do number 1 and a number 2 at some point. It was complete, utter shame brought upon you, and it was excruciatingly painful. So that's the way Jesus died. And some of his closest friends and followers went and they were there when he was on the cross, just staying with him there. His own mother was there watching this all happen. The thieves were making fun of him, and after some time, one of those thieves realized he's not arguing back, he's not trying to justify himself, and he saw something in Jesus. And at some point he said to the other thief, just leave this guy alone. You and I, we're dying for a reason. This man's done nothing wrong and he's still dying. He's taking the same punishment we're taking. And he turns to Jesus and says, when you die and, when you get into heaven, remember me. Remember me kind of suggests to me, because I won't see you there, but remember me, think of me. Jesus said, no, today you will be with me in paradise. And not too long after this, Jesus, he cried out, in Hebrew or Aramaic, it would be, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's been separated from the Father. He feels that complete isolation. He's completely alone for the first time in all eternity, separated from the Lord. And he cries out, why have you forsaken me? And in doing that, he's also quoting a psalm that's giving a little more insight into what's going on there. But he's just utterly in despair. And then finally, he says, into your hands I commit my spirit. And he died. And even that was a way of saying, they are not taking my life from me. I am giving my life. And he's made that clear in a couple of places there. But at this point, Jesus is dead. Now imagine being somebody who's been following Jesus for 3 years. You start out wondering, this guy, something special about this guy. And you get to know him, and he's fun. You get along really well with him. And then you start to realize, I think he actually might be Messiah. He might be the king. And I'm hanging out with him. This is awesome. And you keep learning from him. He keeps teaching. He's confusing you. You start to understand. He confuses you some more. And you're really just enjoying this whole journey. And you're more and more convinced that he is Messiah. And then things start to culminate. And everything starts to go down. And instead of rising up against your enemies and fighting and establishing the throne, he hands himself over and is brutally tortured and killed. What are you thinking at this point? Like, you loved this man. You were close friends with this guy, and you devoted 3 years of your life to learning from him and being with him. Did you just waste all that time? Was he really just a nut job who just thought he was like a god? Like, what is happening? And there's just so much confusion. And there's quite a bit of fear, too, because the religious leaders did this to Jesus. They want to stop this whole movement. If you're in one of his tight circles, they might come after you next. And so after Jesus is dead, the apostles, some of the disciples, they go into hiding, basically. Next time we see them, they're in a locked room and just hiding from anybody who might be after them. And just the turmoil and the despair that they're feeling, it must be overwhelming and intense. Well, as if you've heard anything about Jesus before, I'm sure you turn the page and there he is again. He's alive. So in the next session, we'll talk about the resurrection and how that must have been for all the apostles and the people close to Jesus.